In August of 1661, Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister of France, throws a party. Not just any party. He's just finished building himself a palace, Vaux-le-Vicomte, and by the time it's done, it's more beautiful than anything his own king owns. So instead of hiding that, he decides to celebrate it. He invites King Louis XIV to be the guest of honor. Fireworks light up the gardens. Molière stages a brand new play for the crowd. The most brilliant minds in France are there, trading compliments about their host's taste, his charm, his generosity. Fouquet thinks he's just made himself untouchable. He's wrong. 3 weeks later, in another city entirely, the king's own musketeer arrests him. The official charge is embezzlement. But by Greene's own account, most of what Fouquet stood accused of, he'd actually done with the king's blessing. In Greene's telling, the real offense, the one no court could try him for, was making his own king feel small. Fouquet spends what's left of his life, nearly 20 years, locked in a fortress in the Alps. He never leaves. This is where Robert Greene opens the 48 Laws of Power. Law number 1. Before he teaches you how to gain power, he wants you to see how easily it slips from someone who did almost everything right. Bismarck understood the same danger from the opposite side. 1850. A 35-year-old deputy stands up in the Prussian parliament, and everyone in the room is certain they know what he believes. His name is Otto von Bismarck. Privately, he dreams of uniting the German states under Prussia, by force eventually, starting with a war against Austria. But nearly every deputy in that chamber wants that war too, right now, convinced the Prussian army can already win it. Bismarck knows better. The army isn't ready, and the king wants peace. So Bismarck does something nobody expects. He stands up and argues for peace. He praises Austria. He calls the rush to war reckless. It works better than he could have hoped. Deputies change their votes on the spot. The king is so impressed by his restraint that he makes Bismarck a cabinet minister, a seat close enough to power to begin the climb that, in Greene's account, eventually gives him the authority to rebuild the Prussian military. It takes 16 years before Bismarck gets the war he actually wanted, defeating Austria in 1866. 5 years after that, after a second war, this time against France, the German states finally unify under Prussian control. Exactly what he'd dreamed of back in that parliament chamber, years before he ever said it out loud. If Bismarck had announced his real ambition that day, the king would have distrusted him instantly, and the whole plan would have died in that room. The lesson isn't to lie for the sake of lying. It's this. The moment you tell people exactly what you're building, you hand them a head start on stopping it. Whatever you're actually working toward, a company, a deal, a career move, the version of you that talks about it constantly is giving away the one advantage that costs nothing to keep. Nobody bracing for what's coming. Concealment gets you into position, but once you're building something people can already see, a different force takes over, attention itself. 1836. A young circus assistant named P.T. Barnum takes a walk through the streets of Annapolis, Maryland, wearing a brand new black suit. Within minutes, a crowd starts following him. Then someone shouts his name, except it isn't his name. They think he's a disgraced reverend, a man once tried for murder and acquitted, but never really cleared in the public's mind. The crowd turns into a mob. People are grabbing at his suit. He is seconds from being lynched in the street until he manages to talk his way into leading the mob back to the circus grounds, where he can prove who he actually is. Turns out the circus owner started the rumor himself, on purpose, as a promotion. Barnum never forgot the lesson buried in that near-death experience. A crowd doesn't care why it's paying attention to you. It only cares that it is. He built the rest of his career on it, at one point hiring the worst musicians he could find to play free outdoor concerts near his museum, deliberately, so tourists would pay for a ticket inside just to escape the noise. Good reviews, bad reviews, rumors, scandal. To Barnum, it was all the same currency. If you're building something right now, a brand, a business, a name for yourself, that's still the trade in a lot of attention-driven markets. Getting talked about can matter more than being liked. being good and invisible just doesn't give the market much to work with. Attention pulls people toward you. What happens next flips that completely. It's about becoming impossible to read once they're already watching. 1972, Reykjavik, Iceland. The World Chess Championship, and an entire Cold War rivalry, comes down to two men, Boris Spassky, the reigning champion and a master of reading patterns, and Bobby Fischer, the American challenger. Fischer loses the first game, then he simply doesn't show up for the second, forfeiting it over a dispute about the cameras in the room. 2 games in, he's already down, a hole that should end any championship run before it starts. But Spassky's entire game is built on reading an opponent's patterns and countering them in advance, and Fischer isn't giving him any patterns to read. He shows up late. He changes demands. He behaves like a man playing a completely different game than the one on the board. By the middle of the match, it's Spassky, not Fischer, who's unraveling. In Greene's telling, the champion who built his career on control loses his composure completely, and with it, the match and the title. Fischer was, by any measure, one of the greatest chess minds who ever lived. Greene's point isn't that talent didn't matter here, it's that even real skill needs something to read, and Fischer made sure there was nothing to read. Anyone who's negotiated a deal, pitched an investor, or gone up against a competitor who always seems 3 moves ahead knows this feeling from the losing side. Total predictability might feel safe, but it's also a gift you're handing your opponent for free every single time. Unpredictability rattles an opponent mid-fight. The next story is about what happens once a fight is already over, and whether you actually let it end. 7th century China. She starts as a low-ranking concubine in the imperial court, one of dozens with no real path to power. According to the histories that survive her, she claws her way to the throne by removing every person standing between her and it, including, the record claims, members of her own family. She doesn't stop once she's won either. Every time a rival resurfaces, every time an old enemy looks like they might rebuild their influence, she eliminates the threat completely, immediately, without exception. It's brutal by any modern standard. It's also, historically, hard to argue with. She goes on to hold power for roughly 4 decades, one of the longest stretches at the top in the history of imperial China. Greene actually pulls both of his examples for this law from Chinese history, on purpose, a place with centuries of rulers who showed mercy to a rival and lived just long enough to regret it. You don't need her methods to learn her lesson. In business, in negotiation, in any real competition, a threat you only half neutralize doesn't disappear. It waits. It rebuilds. It comes back for exactly the moment you've let your guard down. Wu never let a rival get the chance to regroup, but total mastery of a fight like that creates a danger of its own. What happens once the fight itself is finally over and the world your whole system was built to survive doesn't exist anymore? Ancient Sparta built one of the most disciplined societies in human history, almost entirely around war. Boys were taken from their mothers at age 7 for military training. The arts were pushed aside. Music was banned. Money and trade were kept out because wealth was seen as a threat to military discipline. For centuries, that rigid system made Sparta one of the most feared military powers in Greece. Then Sparta actually wins. 27 years of fighting against Athens, and Sparta comes out on top. And that victory is the beginning of the end. Athenian money floods into the territory Sparta now has to govern. Spartan officials sent to administer it, with no experience managing wealth or culture, start getting corrupted by exactly the things their whole society had been built to reject. The rigid system that won the war has no idea what to do with peace. Within about 30 years, a weakened Sparta loses a war it once would have won easily, and collapses. This is the law Robert Greene chooses to end his entire book on. Not conceal your intentions, not court attention. Assume formlessness. Because every tactic before this one, taken too far, becomes exactly what killed Sparta. A move that worked once, repeated so often it turns into an identity. Right up until the environment changes, and nobody told the identity. The tactics only work as long as you're reading the room in front of you, not the room from the last time the tactic worked. The strategy that built your business can be the exact strategy that sinks it once the market moves. The actual skill was never picking one weapon. It was staying able to put it down. Bismarck, Barnum, Fischer, Wu. 4 very different tactics, one shared instinct underneath all of them. See the game clearly and use what you see before anyone else does. Sparta is the reminder that even that instinct has an expiration date. So maybe the real question isn't which of these stories to imitate, it's whether Fouquet's mistake was really about a party at all, or about walking into a room full of power and never understanding what everyone else in it was seeing. The 48 Laws of Power goes much deeper into all of it, genuinely worth having on your shelf if any of this hit close to home. If this kind of breakdown is useful, hit subscribe for the next one.